Hello, everybody, and welcome to VIP Deep Talk. My name is Jan Kanty-Milczek. I'm the principal ML engineer at DeepSense AI. With me today, co-hosting is Alicia Stech, our strategic projects lead. Hello, Alicia.
Hello, everyone.
And the VIP of today is Bill Salak, the CEO of Brainly. Bill has over 20 years of experience overseeing large-scale development projects and, of course, even more experience in IT in general. Bill founded and served as CEO of multiple internet and web development companies, and many of them were actually focused on education, which is also the case with Brainly, of course. So glad to have you here, Bill.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jan, and great to see you, Alicia, and hello, everybody.
Hello, indeed. Alicia, I'd like to defer to you to ask some questions about Brainly itself.
Sure. Thank you, Jan, Bill, for your introduction. Bill, in the beginning, we would like to provide our listeners with some background on Brainly. So could you tell us more about the company? What does Brainly do?
Sure. Brainly provides personalized on-demand academic assistance to more than 15 million parents, teachers, and students every day. So some of our features include high-quality, community-rated, and expert-reviewed educational answers and explanations to the questions asked by learners. And basically how this works is that you come to Brainly, you ask your question. If we've seen that question before, and if we have a high quality answer for that question, we'll pull this from our knowledge base, and you can see how others in the Brainly community have rated that answer. If we don't already have a high quality answer in our knowledge base, we'll generate one for you instantly, and we'll give you the opportunity to post that question in the Brainly community so that the community can add their own answers to the question and rate the one that we generated for you. So this is what most people think of when they hear the name Brainly. But we also have micro-tutoring, test prep, and lots more to help learners get unstuck when they're struggling with a topic or a concept. We've evolved from a Q&A platform into a full-fledged learning companion, and our roadmap of upcoming features and capabilities will continue in that direction.
Okay, so thank you very much for the overview. And it's really exciting to hear how Brainly is changing education. And I think that this is especially interesting right now, since education is often mentioned as one of the fields most likely to be transformed by AI. So I'm very curious about your vision for the use of AI in education, and obviously, how does Brainly fit into this vision?
Well, our company vision statement is to give every student in the world access to personalized learning. And when we say every student, we really mean every student, because regardless of their location, school system, background, or their resources, we want to be there for them. So we're well on our way in terms of the scale of usage of Brainly and our global position in the market. But I think it's important to point out that we have a very different perspective of how we deliver on this than most other edtech companies. So we recognize that it's not our role to replace our learners' formal education system. We don't intend to create a second school that students attend after their mandatory 6+ hours of formal classroom instruction. But this is in fact how many edtech products work today. If you are familiar with edtech, especially online edtech, a lot of it is, hey, when you're done with school, come to our school and we'll teach it to you better. And oftentimes that means teach it to you differently than how your teacher's teaching it to you. But we see our role of our products and the job of the systems that we build to understand how the student is being taught, what they're being taught, and to help support that classroom experience, that classroom system. So we exist to fill the gaps and help learners get back on track so that they can excel in the classroom. And all of the product features we build are designed with this in mind.
So for sure, it sounds very, very exciting. And how do you see the role of AI at Brainly? How do you think AI will help you to accomplish this mission that you just told us?
That's a great question. I guess the best way that I can answer this is to explain that the way that I view technology in general as a CTO and as a person who's worked in technology for a long time, I don't see technology as in itself as the end goal. So when we talk about AI, I think about it as one of the technology tools in our tool belt. So its role and how it fits into Brainly, well, we start by thinking about what we want to build. What is the product experience, the feature, what is the outcome that we want to create for our learners? And once we have a solid idea of the value that we can offer through that feature or product, we ask ourselves, how are we going to build this thing? So AI becomes one of those technology tools we might deploy to make that happen, but also in terms of operations. And here I mean like how our employees themselves work. We are always asking ourselves, where do we need to improve and how might we make those improvements? So again, AI is just another technology tool that we might deploy to improve a process or help our employees have a better work experience. And we've become so comfortable with building and integrating and using AI at Brainly that we don't really see it as something separate from anything else that we do. We just see it as another means to an end that that it can be used if appropriate. If it's not a good fit, if it doesn't actually help us make a better product feature, it doesn't become part of that project. So, like I mentioned, this is my take on all technology. It's not specific to AI, but AI definitely fits into that same category way that we think about things.
So my understanding is that first you focus on a value proposition that you would like to provide your users with, and then you think whether technology will be able to help you with it, right?
Exactly right. So just like we might think about, okay, what back-end services do we need? What front-end features do we need? How are we going to build this thing from a system design perspective, from a technology perspective? We look at AI and we say, well, does AI have a role here? Is there a way that when we build this feature or do this thing, that AI can help make this better than if we didn't use AI? And if the answer is yes, then we do an assessment. How much work is it to incorporate AI? What's the additional value that it's adding? And then we look at the ROI. We ask ourselves, like, is that additional investment worth it?
I'm sorry to cut in, but I just wanted to say I love the, let me call it, conservative approach to AI, because of course we should be viewing pretty much every tool in this way. We assess whether we need it and how much it takes to actually implement it. But many people like to overhype AI constantly. So I'm very glad we've got well, not really the complete opposite, just the realistic and pragmatic approach to AI from you, Bill. Sorry for cutting in. Take it away, Alicia.
Thank you, and for your comment here. Yes, I also want to highlight that I really like the approach that first you focus on this value proposition and then think whether technology will be able to help you with it. And we also see on the market that there is a lot of companies trying to figure out some AI ideas and what exactly they can implement here. And then in the end, they have this very long list of ideas for a project. And I guess that this is something similar with Brainly. So probably you have a lot of ideas on how you can use AI to improve your value proposition. So my question is, how do you prioritize your use cases around AI? How do you prioritize it?
Yeah, it really is tied to the value of what are we trying to accomplish. So we have essentially within Brainly, we have a couple of different tracks of development. So you can think of our main track, the one that we have the biggest amount of people working on, as our production track. And this is the track of development that is creating features that help drive business metrics like conversion rates and time on site and educational value, like how well is the product working from an educational perspective. All of those things that are related to those business goals, we have a list of projects and ideas that formulate a huge backlog. And we're prioritizing that backlog based on the business value. So when we have something that comes to the top of the list and we say, hey, this is the thing that we should work on next, we again assess like what are the things needed to make this happen. And if AI is one of those things, and if all of the teams working in the AI discipline are booked with work, we then have to prioritize against their existing work. And we ask ourselves, like, is this thing more important than what they're working on? Can we take this on now, or should we wait and maybe fit it in a month when a particular team with the right skill set becomes available? But then we have this separate track, and these are more long-term investments, and this is what we call our technology track. And typically that's a separate backlog, and the backlog and the projects there exist over multiple years. So we're looking not just at the value of what we're going to have when it's done, but we're looking at milestones, and we're asking ourselves, what's the best path forward here? What is the next milestone that we want to achieve? What's the next proof of concept that we need to prove out to continue to work on this thing that's going to take several years to ultimately see itself in the product? So those two separate tracks can have slightly different methodologies or different criteria, but I should say same methodology, different criteria. It's about looking at the backlog and prioritizing, and then asking ourselves, can we take this on right now?
Okay. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on that. It seems that you have a very well structured approach. So thanks for sharing this. Yeah, I think that these tips will be really helpful for everyone considering implementation of some new AI features. Yeah, so now we've just discussed how to choose AI priorities, and we would like to move on to the implementation process. So could you walk us through the process of implementing AI projects at Brainly?
Sure. I mean, I can't get too much in the weeds. I can say that at my level, I give a lot of autonomy to the teams and to the managers of those teams so that they can optimize their processes and the way they work. And frankly, they know a lot better than I do how to do their jobs. But what I can tell you in terms of the process of getting to a project being greenlit, there's typically a lot of discussion around how are we going to approach this? Let's say that we've already decided that we want to do this thing, and we have a rough idea of how long it's going to take, or a rough idea of when that value is going to be first exposed into our product, or ready for integration, I should say. So we start to talk about the technical path forward. And as you guys know, and probably most of your listeners know, AI projects often don't have 100% confidence that they can get done in the way that you expect them to get done, at least in the beginning. You have to go through some phase of, can we actually do this thing at a level of quality that meets the criteria for a production outcome? So we generally spin up a short research phase or a proof of concept phase to explore how we're going to approach it and prove that we can do it at a high enough level of quality that we should make the full investment to productionize that outcome. But once we have the path forward from a technology point of view, from an implementation point of view, and we have that proof that it can be done at a high enough level of quality, it's all about productionizing that outcome, making sure we hit those quality standards, that we have them well defined, and then ultimately, in the end, delivering a result that is performant and meeting our expectations for how it actually works within the product and that it can be scaled. So I know that's very high level, but that's what you get when you ask a CTO that question. I don't want to micromanage the teams. I can say that I love to be involved in the discussions about how we go forward, and I often offer advice, but my advice is still very high level and broad and nowhere near the level that the actual team leads are thinking in and working in.
But I think that it's still very, very helpful, and I think that this is also very useful to have an understanding of what this AI journey, AI projects look like. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. And the last topic that I want to cover here is about challenges. So leveraging LLMs is something new for all of us. And I'm very curious, what have been some of the biggest challenges you've faced regarding implementing AI projects, and obviously, how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so let's start by clarifying how I think about LLMs and using LLMs, because I think there probably is different approaches out there amongst your listeners, and certainly when I talk with non-technical folks, there's different levels of understanding that kind of overlap with kind of the misunderstandings or different opinions that I also see from AI practitioners. So let's clarify this. So first of all, I don't consider using an LLM to be the work of an AI practitioner. I don't think that it requires any specific skills that are unique to AI practitioners. And in fact, I don't think that they're necessarily well positioned to be the users of LLMs. Now, are they better positioned to do the evaluation of LLM outcomes using data science and data-driven approaches? Absolutely. They have the discipline. They already have the methodologies in place, and I think that they have a role there to sort of test the outcomes. But when you think about prompt tuning and prompt creation, this is much more of a domain expert and a language expert. So understanding the formulation of words and sentences in a way that creates a more consistent result and gets you a better quality result, that is very much squarely in my mind in the field of somebody who is an expert in language. Understanding the right domain keywords, the subject matter keywords, and framing the problem in a way that the LLM can respond to it more predictably than not. We all know that LLMs aren't all that predictable, but more predictably than not, again, is a subject matter expert problem. So let's start by just taking that, whether you agree with it or not, let's take that as the foundation of everything I'm going to tell you next. That doesn't require an AI practitioner to use an LLM, and probably they're not the best people suited for it. So the challenges that we've had with using LLMs was, number one, overcoming that misunderstanding of where does it fit within our production pipeline, like who's going to be using this, who's going to be developing prompts, who's going to be writing the code that calls the APIs for a commercial LLM or even an in-house LLM. And then drawing that line within the company and saying, organizationally, this is how we're going to work with them. Once we overcame that sort of misunderstanding, and there was a lot of pushback because a lot of people wanted to get their hands on it. Everyone from like project managers to business people to non-AI practicing engineers to the AI practicing engineers. We kind of had to separate and be like, look, this code is nothing special that's calling an LLM. It's just calling an API. All the work's going into creating these prompts. Like, are you the best person to create these prompts? And like, let's align on that. Once we got over all of that and we started to understand that the role of the AI practitioners was to eventually be able to test the outcomes of these LLMs using data science, we then aligned on a path forward, and everybody started to see where their role was fitting. But testing LLMs or testing outcomes of LLMs in the beginning wasn't, it wasn't a well-established practice. And I think that there was, well, not even think, I know that there was a very heavy leaning towards predictability, right? And I think especially in the beginning when LLMs, when GPT 3 and then 3.5 came out, there was this expectation that the LLM should say the same thing every time. If you gave it the same question, it should produce the same answer. And that the lack of that consistency was actually a bug. And so there was a whole nother alignment process on how do we test these things and what are the actual expectations. And here I drew the analogy with my teams, and I sort of set the standard and expectation that, like, if you had 10 different people ask a human expert the same question in different days, do you expect that human expert would use the exact same words in the exact same order every single time they answered that question to those 10 different people in 10 different days? The reality is that, these LLMs act much more like a human expert than we gave them credit for in the beginning, in that they weren't consistent. They would answer things with the same general knowledge and the same information, but slightly differently. Now, we needed to be able to distinguish from, hey, it's saying something different from it's saying the same thing in a different way. So that was a whole different alignment on how to test LLM outcomes that we needed to come to. We have much better techniques for that now. And I think the whole industry has aligned on that understanding that, like, you're not going to get the same words coming out every time. But that's certainly in the beginning, that was a huge challenge for us, and I imagine for everyone. And then also understanding where you wanted more creativity in an answer and where you wanted less creativity. So these were adjustable attributes. They still are adjustable attributes within an LLM. Sort of understanding like how to play with those parameters in setting up your call to a model and where creativity was more helpful. This became more of an art than really a science, and that's extremely hard to measure. Like, when do you want more creativity, and how do you measure that creativity? An example of this would be, we built a feature on Brainly called Fun Fact, and the idea was that when you were reviewing an answer to a question on Brainly, we would have this little section on the page that displayed a fun fact related to the answer. So when were fun facts just boring trivia, and when were they actually fun facts? Like, this is an example of what I consider sort of a creative, subjective creative definition. Like, how do you measure that? And I think today we have similar problems. We're addressing all of these as we find them, but I think we have similar problems, specifically in education, where we don't necessarily have strict standards. Like, the world doesn't really have strict standards about this educational answer is more educational and therefore better than this other educational answer. It becomes like a very subjective thing. And how do you test that? Us aligning on those standards and understanding them and is requiring us to define them ourselves, which is a challenge.
Thank you very much for sharing all these challenges. So that's all I wanted to ask you, Bill, in this particular part. And now I will hand it over to Jan.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Before we go into some more general questions, I wanted to get something very, very specific in this case. I actually worked for Brainly briefly, and I had a chance to touch the content moderation system. Brainly, of course, has a lot of similarities with just social media platforms. If we wouldn't just call Brainly an educational social media platform. And one of the things about social media platforms is, of course, moderation. But my understanding and what I remember is we didn't want to use a run-of-the-mill moderation system at Brainly, because moderating for the purpose of education is different than moderating for the purpose of just keeping a social medium clean of trolls and whatnot. So I wanted to ask what were the challenges related specifically to content moderation on Brainly?
Well, I can tell you how I think about it, and I think with your work there, I remember having lots of deep discussions with our director of AI, John Mario, who I know and work closely with. But I'll tell you some background in about those conversations and how I think about moderation on our platform. So number one, we want to remove the obvious harm. We don't want any content that is harmful, and harmful is at least an industry standard that's pretty well defined for non-educational platforms. But when it comes to educational platforms specifically, I think there's a lot of opinions about what's harmful, and it becomes a bit of a stricter standard. And there, I think we still need better alignment and better understanding, and being able to separate what are like regional opinions about appropriateness and harmful content from objectively harmful content that can be considered harmful from an industry like a broader industry standpoint and point of view. But then there's also this aspect that Brainly is educational, and we shouldn't have non-educational content. So the definition of what is educational and what's not educational, I think, is a much, much harder thing to try to moderate and define. Those two areas are probably the most obvious, yet there's nuances, right? They're the most obvious sort of things, like baseline goals that we want to accomplish. There's a whole nother part of moderation that I think is still untouched and maybe not as obvious, and that is about getting rid of content on Brainly where harmful isn't obvious, because it's still, there's nothing in the content that's offensive, and there's nothing in the content that the industry would say like this is objectionable, but it's harmful in the sense that it misleads or wastes the time of the learner. And here I'm really extending the definition of harmful to be any time you waste a learner's in any situation in which you waste a learner's time, right? Imagine our learners are frustrated. They're coming to Brainly for help because not because they know the answers and everything is so easy for them, but because they're struggling with a topic or a concept and they really need that extra help. So here they're at their most vulnerable in the sense that they need to have their confidence reinforced and they need high quality information and they need it quickly. So whenever we expose them to low quality information, I consider that a waste of time and it's harmful. So there's definitely a moderation process here that needs to be more fully developed where we identify low quality information that's harmful in the sense that it wastes their time or reduces their confidence um, in their ability to learn, and we get that off the platform as quickly as possible. Um, Still an underserved area of moderation for us, but at a high level, those are the three categories and how I think about it.
Thank you so much. And it's very, very reassuring to know that you're actually thinking about the end user and their education, even when talking about content moderation itself. One more thing I would like to know is I remember that moderation on Brainly used to be based on user reports and human moderators making the final call. Uh, then, uh, then it was moved to using AI as well as, of course, user reports to send candidate harmful messages or potentially harmful messages to the human moderators. And it was a hybrid system of AI and humans. I wanted to ask, what is the case right now? Do you still use human moderators to make the final call, especially with all the complexities that you've outlined in your previous answer?
So not 100%, but they still have a role, and I think they always will. There's content that we're confident should be deleted, and so we remove that content automatically now based off of the outcomes of our AI moderation systems. But there's content that we don't have as high of a confidence in, and this is where we ask human beings to jump in and provide their opinion, which is great because we have a process now that has a built-in feedback loop. So you can imagine that all of that human scored content can then go back into retraining the models, and we can iteratively improve them over time if we just continue to run this process. So always see like a human in the loop for something, but that's also, you can consider that an ongoing training process, an ongoing labeling and classification and scoring process with humans in the loop.
Thank you so much. Is it always the case that when you improve moderation, that the user experience is overall better, or have you had cases where caring about the user's education, the student's education, through filtering out potentially harmful, potentially misleading content, actually made users unhappy, for example, that their messages are being deleted? How does this interplay?
Yeah, I think that certainly there's false positives, right? So we can imagine that there's some percentage of content that we're deleting either through humans or technology that we shouldn't be deleting. Um, and certainly some people get upset when that happens. You can imagine that they've invested a little bit of time in creating that content. They've offered it to our platform, and here we're telling them that it's, we're giving them kind of a stern message like, hey, you posted something you shouldn't have, when in fact that was incorrect. So definitely that will happen, but I can tell you that it happens with humans as well as AI. So it's not necessarily a problem that AI introduced. We had those sort of subjective false positives with human beings as well. I think that the promise of AI and the promise of technology and automation of that technology is that ultimately we can train out a lot of those false positives and we can measure them and hopefully shake out the vast majority of them. Now, our false positive rate is acceptable today and it's really low. I think it's probably I don't want to say better than human judgment, but I would say it's on par with human judgment today. I think there is a place where we can actually make it better than human judgment, or at least let's say the casually trained human evaluator versus the expert human evaluator. I think we're going to get closer to the expert human evaluator with AI, and surpass the lesser trained human evaluator.
That sounds outright great. Thank you so much. Another topic that I'm interested in is more general. How did Brainly even start its AI journey? Was it obvious that Brainly would use AI as a big part of its business back when it was being founded, or that come later? What should companies even pay attention to when starting and thinking, oh, should I be an AI company or just a web company, so to speak?
I'll answer your question in a little bit reverse order. I'll answer the last part first. So I've been saying this for a while. I've been saying it publicly as well as in-house. So no secrets here. I think that being able to use AI effectively is table stakes for a modern company. Like if you're not thinking about what does the role of AI as a technology play in your business or in your company, you're already behind where the rest of the market is. So I think that companies who aren't thinking that way or don't start with that premise that AI should be part of how we think about building our service, our product, our business, I think that they are already starting well behind the starting line, whereas all their competitors are already running the race. Um, Now, with Brainly, it was started over 10 years ago, and it certainly didn't start with AI as a first principle. It started as a pretty simple idea and over time evolved into a much more complex product. And I joined Brainly in 2019, and AI already existed at Brainly. However, it didn't have a good name. So when I came in with a background in working in AI. I came in very inspired and motivated by the idea of applying AI in educational environments. And it's one of the reasons why I came to Brainly was specifically to do that. And also when I came in, I very quickly realized, oh wow, our AI function within this company isn't viewed favorably. And in fact, there were some calls to just shut it down. Like, this is an expensive thing that doesn't add value. Why are we wasting money on this? Just shut it down. Um, and that was actually one of the things that I was looking into was like, how and what are we doing, and why is this thing not working, and is there value to be had here? We we sort of quickly realigned between my boss and myself. We quickly realigned on um, the opportunity, and this was largely a discussion around the data that Brainly had and our use case, and how with these things in place, AI was a natural fit for us and could really enhance our offerings and really push us forward into a space that people weren't playing in. We had the opportunity to build something new and extremely valuable for the world. My boss saw that, and we created a plan to make a multi-year. At that time, when we were talking about it, it was a 5-year plus investment, tens of millions of dollars into building out an AI function that would be world class, and to really accomplish these goals that we had set for ourselves in terms of enhancing our um, our product, enhancing our moderation, so product capabilities, moderation, and how we worked as a company. We sort of talked about all these aspects that we could incorporate AI into. And we were a couple years into that, and we started to see really, really positive outcomes. So, it takes a while to sort of overhaul and rebuild an AI function within your organization. So I hired leadership, I changed up teams, we redefined roles, we talked about how we'd work with AI, we talked about what we wanted to do with AI, and there was, a year plus of just bootstrapping the organization and trying to build something. Where something, and I'll put something in quotes, where the something was something that wasn't necessarily going to be seen in the product, but it would eventually evolve into something that could be used in the product. And I think this was a bit of a frustrating time for some of the early joiners in this new organization. They saw a lot of their work happening behind the scenes, not making its way into product. And I think, especially at that time, there was a trend in the practice of AI and how AI practitioners worked within companies is that they would take an existing process or thing and they would have well-defined metrics that they would try to improve through applying AI. So like, let's take this thing we're doing and let's make it better with AI. And really our approach was completely different because we were like, we're rebuilding our business and AI is a tool and it's not necessarily going to replace something or improve something we're doing, but we're actually going to define new products and new things. And to build those new products and new things, we need some core capabilities in AI that aren't necessarily going to ship within, the project completion timeframe. It's not like we're going to build this and then we're going to ship it. So I got a lot of comments about like, well, we're not seeing this work in the product. We're not seeing our work benefiting the product. And I had to sort of keep explaining like we're building capabilities that will eventually be there. I promise, guys, stick with me. Some people didn't. Some people left. Some people stuck with us. Um, and what we see today is exactly the results of that. So about a year and a half to 2 years in, we started to see, okay, the pieces are coming together, and all these things we've been building, they're now resulting in a product enhancement that's not superficial. It's not like we're just improving this feature here and this feature there, but we're in fact making huge changes to the product and we're reimagining what our product is on top of these core capabilities that we've developed behind the scenes. And so we continue to work that way today. And that's, I referred to this earlier, we have this track of technology investment, which is deep and it goes over multiple years. And we're building really hard to build stuff that's part of a core experience that will be integrated later. But that's a long marathon. And I think when you're used to running short races and all of a sudden you're running marathons, that's a hard thing to shift over to. But I think that now that the team has seen how this works, they're much more patient with me. And frankly, I think a lot of people now enjoy those bigger challenges because we're doing work that other people have never done before. So um, I get a lot less questions like, hey, can you show me an example of this? Because it's like, hey, nobody's ever done this, guys. I can't show you an example. All I can do is explain what it is we're trying to accomplish. We have to invent this together. So I get a lot less of those questions of like, show me an example. And I'm getting a lot more questions like, what do you mean by this? What should the goal be? What does success look like? Which is awesome. It's a whole different framing.
Yep. Thank you so much. It's fascinating. I actually wasn't aware that that was how the AI journey of Brainly came to be. So I'm very glad. I asked. One thing related to this, and also to one of your previous answers, you mentioned that one of the challenges is measuring the impact of AI projects, or probably pretty much any internal projects in such a platform. But I wanted to ask specifically, how do you measure the impact of AI projects on user experience and perhaps even harder to measure on learning outcomes? How do you approach that?
The learning outcomes one is really hard, and I think that we're not touching that one deeply right now. That's an area where we involve experts, and those experts provide opinions after they review content or review outcomes, and that's fine. That's a good, draw a line in the sand for where we are now. It gives us a sense of if we're going in the right direction, I should say. There is going to be a future state in which we're doing independent third-party testing and we're looking at actual outcomes. So does a student who uses Brainly, do they get better grades? Do they perform better on tests? Are they, better educated, better prepared for whatever classroom challenges that they have? Those third-party independent tests they'd be premature if we were to deploy them now, because there's so much more that we have to do. And that is such a heavy lift that I feel like we're still at least a year to 2 years out from deploying those types of measurement techniques. So what we do now for educational value, like I said, we get expert educators to come in and provide their opinion. We try to gather diverse opinions. and then we make an assessment on, do we see these opinions lining up? Are there parts of these opinions that we want to incorporate back into our product and make changes? Or do we feel like this is good enough to ship as is, and maybe those future improvements can happen later? But then there's projects which are much more readily measurable, and then there's the in between. There's the gray area projects, and I'd say the vast majority of work that we do falls into that gray area of measurement. But the easy ones are, we have a clearly defined outcome, we have a clearly defined metric or thing by which we can say this is successful. And we oftentimes need to align on that in the beginning and say, this is the thing we're trying to do. Here's how we want to measure it. And now it's just a process of creating a system to produce that metric, and then the improvement. And we run that iterative process of test, improve, until we hit our benchmarks. Those easy ones, like I said, they're not the majority case. It's usually a bit harder than that, where we're using a proxy metric or we're using some kind of interpretation metric. So we can't necessarily measure the thing that we're trying to do, but we can measure something that's an indicator that the thing we're trying to do is happening. Coming up with those is really hard, and oftentimes just as subjective as an expert opinion. So it's an informed approach. It's still, are you getting it right? Are you defining the right things to be looking at? That's often where a project lives or dies. I have full confidence in the guys doing the work that if we give them a metric, they can hit it, or at least tell me that it's not possible early enough that I don't invest in that project. But oftentimes, like if we define the wrong thing, then it doesn't really do what we wanted it to do, or at least doesn't have as big of an impact as we expected it to have. So that's where the challenge lies, and it often involves understanding multiple parts of the system to be able to create that proxy metric or that interpretive metric. So it's not just about like, well, I understand the specifics of this project. It's more like I understand the ecosystem of systems that are working together. And so here's what I expect to see in this system that's maybe 2 layers away from the one you're working on. It should have this behavior. I know that's really hard to imagine, like to build a mental model about. So let's build like a real world example. Auto cropping. So today on Brainly, if you have the iOS app in the US, you can point your camera in the Brainly app at a question, and it will automatically select the area of the image of what the camera is looking at and say, this is the question. It'll sort of auto crop it. The user can then submit that image. Well, we had a problem, right? Because when we defined that feature, it was like, well, what's the value of this to the business? There was this sense that users would, it would be easier for users to take pictures if they just had a feature that auto cropped. There was another theory that we would actually get better questions. So we'd have less questions cut off, so we'd get the full text of the question. But there's also this other aspect here, and that is that a lot of learners who were taking pictures of questions without auto cropping were taking pictures of part of the question, not the entire question. So they were leaving out information that we needed to understand the whole question. They were using their subjective opinion about what we needed, and in fact, they didn't know how our systems worked, so they're just taking a picture of part of it. And my theory here was, so one approach was to look at the pictures that users are taking and define how auto cropping should work based on what users were actually doing. But I made a pretty big statement up front, and I said, no, the users aren't the experts. We know how our systems work, and in fact, we can imagine how our systems will evolve, and the more context we have, the better it is. So we should define auto cropping to take a picture of the entire question, all of the context for the question that our system needs today, and what we can imagine our systems will need in the future. So even though at that time we couldn't read images, we can't see graphs or diagrams, we can imagine in the future our system will be able to read diagrams and graphs. And so when you consider auto cropping taking a picture, it shouldn't just be the text, it should be all of the visual references needed to understand the text. Directly contradicted how our systems worked and how our users were using the system. So we had to sort of develop these theories and define goals in a way that weren't necessarily grounded in directly measurable outcomes at the time, but were sort of proxy metrics or proxy definitions to say, like, okay, the definition is it has all of the context to understand the text. That's what you're going to measure. And trust me, this is going to matter at some point. Well, I mean, you guys all know that we have multimodal LLMs now. So imagine if we didn't have an auto-cropping system that did that we'd be rebuilding that system right now with a new definition, right? But we're not, because we had that expectation that this was coming. It works the right way. It also allowed us to understand when we saw those images or those auto-cropped images with all of the context, to understand the text better for our human evaluators, to understand if we were giving good answers. So there's all these benefits that were sort of not directly understandable unless you understood the whole ecosystem, right? And then we created a proxy metric that we were able to hit.
I love it, and kudos on being so forward-looking with the last one, because many executives would just miss it or just not collect this, and you were there to ensure that all the data would be there in the future. Big congratulations. One thing that interests me as well is much more technical than everything else I've asked pretty much. And this would be about MLOps. How important is MLOps for Brainly, especially with the scale that you're doing business on? And when did you start noticing that you need to implement MLOps practices? Was it early enough? Was it too late?
Well, that's a great question. So this goes back to sort of this bigger approach that I have to technology in general. It's not specific to AI, but in general, my approach to technology is that we should standardize the tools and techniques that we use to build technology so that we can integrate automation more easily. We can see opportunities for automation more easily and build those systems more easily. So from the beginning of me working at Brainly, I came in with this philosophy of, hey, let's standardize our tool set, let's standardize our technology stack, let's build frameworks that make it easier to write code, and let's automate the heck out of everything. And I've had a lot of discussions over my career with people about, and this happened at Brainly as well, about like, well, let's have this process so developers don't do this bad thing. And I'm like, no, processes are words. Like when you talk about a process, and here I mean like, let's write it down and tell them they have to do it this way. My answer is no. When you have a process that's words only, it's meaningless. Like imagine all of the new employees that you hire, imagine the churn that you have within your company. You're constantly having to train and remind and repeat yourself. Forget saying things. Let's just build systems that check stuff and make it do the right thing. And let's build frameworks that make it hard for people to make those mistakes and do things differently than we want them to do. So we invest and have always invested in automation. In fact, we have an entire team dedicated to this. We have a team called Automation Ops, and their whole job is to write services that can be deployed autonomously. So I'm also really big on self-serve. I want people to be able to deploy servers, update things themselves. But again, it has to happen on a way that's templated so that we understand that all of our best practices are in place. So today at Brainly, like you can, through some domain service language, a declarative, YAML-based configuration, you can define a very complex system with compute, with databases, with all these things, and you can write and build a system on top of those items, but you're deploying those items from a catalog. And so there's certain choices, like you can only select one of these types of databases that we support. You can only deploy one of these types of compute environments that we support. And when you deploy them, they get deployed with automated CI/CD, and backups are built into it. So they're automatically backing themselves up. You don't have to do that yourself. All of our best practices are in place so that anybody can deploy complex systems just through declaring what they need in a YAML and then writing the code that deploys to those systems. So when we started rebuilding our AI function, it was very much from that point of view first. It was not just we're going to build an AI function here at Brainly that's world class, but we're going to automate the heck out of everything that we can automate, and we're going to have standardized tooling, and we're going to have processes that allow us to not only learn from each other, but when we find something broken or when we find something that can be improved, let's codify that improvement and put it into a catalog so everybody else who deploys a system like that gets the benefit of what you've learned or what you've contributed. And we have this idea of inner source at Brainly where anybody can contribute or propose new standards or new technologies, and then we vote as a community. And ultimately, I'll approve it or reject it based on my own experiences. But the idea is that we have this process to for anybody to propose improvements and then for everyone else to benefit from it, because then we'll standardize those improvements into our stack. So MLOps is very much a part of that. And I think that, what a lot of people call today MLOps, it's sort of this idea of what DevOps used to be, which is it's a team that does the automation. And I think just like DevOps needed to be re-understood as a culture, I think MLOps needs to be re-understood as a culture as well. Certainly there are people who know how to automate those things, and that's a job. And, there's an experience to be gained there and a job to be doing there. But the idea of MLOps should be a cultural idea that we're all contributing towards this thing, which is an automated and standardized way to work. We're all responsible for contributing. We're all responsible for using it. And there may be a few guys who are writing those systems, but ultimately they're building a catalog of services that other people get to use. Those other people being their customers. And so they should be telling those guys who are automating those systems what's working for them and what's not working for them. And that culture of feedback and automation is hopefully what MLOps will be redefined as someday, because DevOps definitely suffered from DevOps as a team for far too long, and it really did need to shift to DevOps as a culture much sooner. We would have all benefited from that if we'd seen that sooner.
Thank you for sharing the view on this, and I definitely agree, or maybe not agree, but I was just convinced it wasn't a topic I pondered a lot on, and maybe I should have. Thank you so much. And that would be it when it comes to questions from me. Alicia, maybe you have some.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. So we know that AI world is evolving at a rapid pace, and it's very challenging to keep up with all important things happening in AI world. So I'm wondering, how does Brainly stay ahead of the curve regarding AI? And how do you personally, Bill, stay updated on these ongoing changes?
Well, I can tell you that my team knows a lot more than I do in almost every area of the company. Like, there's people who work in very specific niche parts of AI. Those AI practitioners know their job and know that area of evolution far better than I do. I get the benefit of talking to these people, getting their ideas exposed to me so that I can consider them. I have the benefit of having a broader perspective, so I can see how those ideas integrate into all of the other ideas that are surfacing in the world and in Brainly, in the Brainly practitioner space. And then I also get the benefit of having 25 years of experience and realizing that not a lot of stuff is really new. It's just new ways of doing the stuff we used to do. With that said, there is really, truly something unique and special happening in the space of Gen AI right now, especially around the idea that Gen AI is a new compute platform and not just a way to do the same things we've been doing. I think it's really a new platform, much more aligned with the invention of the internet. I think it's like that big of a platform shift. So I think, here, the real answer is I learn a lot from the people I work with. I rely upon my experience to separate that's a meaningful trend or that's a meaningful signal from, that's just another version of something I've seen before and probably isn't going to have that big of an impact. And so I try to hone in on those signals and understand where they're going and what the implications could be. And I think that whenever I see something that appears as a signal that, hey, this is important, pay attention to it, whenever I see that signal and I start to imagine like what type of impact could this have, where could it evolve into, those forward-looking sort of fantasies that I have about what that thing could become are really what inform my investments. Because I know that if I'm seeing it with my level of inexperience and not being the expert, if I can see it, those experts who are inside the problem are probably seeing this a lot more clearly than I am, and it's almost certainly going to be a thing. Um, and so I start to seek out the people that I can get more information from on those topics, and I try to learn as much as I can, and then I place my bets. At the end of the day, an executive's job is largely a gambling. We're putting money where we think things are going. We're trying to understand and separate signal from noise, and we're trying to build a path forward based off those signals. But it is largely informed gambling. Um, I've been okay at it. I think I've made some good calls. I've made some bad calls in my career. I've learned from that. But so far, so good. I do understand the education space well enough, and I do have enough experience in technology that what we're going through right now is providing a lot of opportunities, and I do see paths clearly. Hopefully, I'm not wrong. We'll see where we land in 2 to 3 years, but so far, so good. The last 2 to 3 years have gone well, and I think I have a clear understanding of where the next 2 to 3 years will go, but not much clarity beyond that.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on that. And I also think that it's very important to know whom you should reach out to get specific information, just to have this intuition when exactly some things need to be discussed. So thanks a lot for your answer here. And the next topic that I want to discuss with you is related to future. So we know that the beginning of the school year is approaching. So I want to ask you, are there any new features that you are planning to release in the near future?
Yeah, I can tell you about the latest, and this is really something we're not publicly talking about, so you guys are getting a bit of a scoop here. The newest stuff coming will be a new answer experience on Brainly. So we've spent quite a bit of time improving our answering AI, and there will be a whole new UI UX built around that. And I can say that our intention with this investment and where this goes into the future is to go deeper and deeper into understanding how specific topics and concepts should be answered. And that is very different than what most Gen AI is doing today. So, if you go to ChatGPT or Perplexity or most other general answering AIs, generative and general answering AIs, you're going to get an experience where, if you asked a question about history versus biology versus, let's say, literature, you're going to get answers that have different information, but the shape of the answer and the attributes of the answer aren't necessarily all that different. And we're going really deep with our educational consultants into understanding how a history question, like what the template of a history question answer should look like for it. We're even getting down to like, should American history look different than this other type of history? A question of this particular type, should it have different attributes than a question of a different type? And so we've defined a general education answering standard, but we're going deeper now into understanding all of the subtopics and the subtopics within subjects to understand what the shape and attributes of those answers should be to provide the highest educational experience for our learners. You'll see a little bit of that coming out before back to school, and then you'll see us continuing to go deep on that for the next 5 years.
Sounds very exciting. So we keep our fingers crossed that everything will go smoothly here.
And thank you for the scoop. We love it. Before we close, is there anything that you would like to add, Bill, and we just didn't ask you and you had no chance?
Well, we started by talking about the impact of AI on education. And I think that this is a really great conversation to be having. And I'm glad that the world is waking up to this. There's a lot of us who've been working in ed tech for a long time who felt that it's been underserved. I'm happy to see that it's getting some attention. And I think that the more that we're all talking about it and the more that we can keep each other inspired, the larger the impact will be. So thank you for bringing up this topic and spending time on it. And I hope that the world in general is having a lot more discussions about how to apply technology to help improve education worldwide.
Thank you so much. And I agree wholeheartedly about the importance of education, transforming education, and talking about it. So thank you again. This was Bill Salak from Brainly, an amazing guest. And thank you again from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Thank you to my co-host Alicia. Thanks to all our listeners and viewers. Goodbye and see you again.